The Broken Alliance. The emergency klaxons echoed through the command bridge of the Coalition flagship Eternal Vigilance as Admiral Crix's four arms moved frantically across the holographic controls. His beetle-like carapace, scarred from countless battles, gleamed under the red warning lights that bathed the bridge in an ominous glow. Through the reinforced viewport, the twisted wreckage of what had once been the proud Coalition Third Fleet drifted silently through space, a graveyard of shattered dreams and fallen warriors. Status report. Crix commanded, his mandibles clicking with barely contained fury. His species, the Craxi, had evolved from hive-minded insects on the desert world of Xerion, where survival meant perfect coordination and unwavering loyalty to the collective good. They had been the backbone of the Stellar Coalition's military for over 2 centuries, but even their legendary discipline was being tested by the relentless advance of the Void Hunters. Lieutenant Zara, a Zelani whose translucent energy form flickered with distress, materialized beside the command chair. Her people were beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form millennia ago, capable of interfacing directly with any electronic system. Admiral, we've lost contact with 17 more ships in the past hour. The Thunder's Roar, Stellar Pride, and Iron Mountain have gone completely dark. Long-range sensors indicate massive hull breaches and reactor failures. The weight of command pressed down on Crix's shoulders, like the crushing gravity of a collapsed star. Each lost ship represented not just advanced technology and strategic resources, but hundreds of lives, families, dreams, futures that would never come to pass. The Coalition had once boasted a fleet of 300 vessels, representing 12 different species united in their determination to explore the galaxy and protect the innocent. Now, after 3 years of devastating warfare against the Void Hunters, they were down to 47 ships, many of them damaged and running on emergency power. Captain Thane, the Thorak tactical officer, approached with heavy footsteps that shook the deck plating. His people resembled living mountains with skin like granite and strength that could crush steel, evolved on a world where tectonic activity never ceased. Admiral, our scouts report the enemy flagship approaching from Sector 7. The Soul Reaper is heading directly for our position, accompanied by at least 60 destroyer-class vessels. The name sent a chill through every being on the bridge. The Soul Reaper was Supreme Overlord Zephyros's personal command ship, a massive dreadnought that stretched nearly 2 kilometers in length. Its hull was composed of some unknown black metal that seemed to absorb light itself, and its weapons could crack planets in half. More terrifying than its firepower, however, was its commander. Zephyros was an entity of pure malevolence, a being whose origins remained shrouded in mystery, but whose appetite for destruction was legendary throughout the galaxy. How long until they reach us? Crix asked, though he dreaded the answer. 18 hours at current velocity, Thane replied grimly. Sir, with respect, we cannot win this engagement. Our remaining forces are no match for a fleet of that size, especially with the Soul Reaper leading the charge. Crix's compound eyes fixed on the tactical display, where red dots representing enemy ships vastly outnumbered the blue dots of the Coalition fleet. The mathematics were simple and brutal. They were facing extinction not just of their military force, but potentially of their entire civilization. The Void Hunters didn't just conquer territory, they consumed it, leaving nothing but empty space, where thriving worlds had once existed. Sir, came a voice from the communication station. Ensign Mora, a delicate butterfly-like creature from the garden world of Serenity, looked up from her console with antennae quivering in excitement. We're receiving a response to our distress call. The signal is coming from an unexplored sector beyond the rim. 3 weeks ago, in desperation, the Coalition had broadcast an emergency message to every corner of known space, pleading for assistance from any species capable of providing military aid. The responses had been disappointing. Most civilizations were too distant to help, others too weak to make a difference, and some too frightened of the Void Hunters to risk involvement. Can you decode it? Crix asked, a small spark of hope flickering in his chest. Mora's delicate fingers danced over her controls, her species' natural affinity for communication and translation making her invaluable in first contact situations. The signal is, unusual, sir. It's using mathematical principles I've never seen before, but the intent is clear. They're accepting our request for aid and providing coordinates for a meeting point. Who are they? Lieutenant Zara asked, her energy form pulsing with curiosity. They identify themselves as representatives of something called the Sol system and claim to represent a species called humans. Mora replied, her translation tentacles working furiously to make sense of the alien syntax. Admiral, they say they'll arrive at the coordinates in 72 hours with a full response fleet. Captain Thane snorted, a sound like boulders grinding together. Never heard of them. What kind of fleet could an unknown species possibly field, and why would they risk themselves for strangers? Crix considered this carefully. The Coalition had made contact with hundreds of species over the centuries, mapping their territories and cataloging their capabilities. For a previously unknown civilization to possess both interstellar travel and military forces suggested either a very recent technological breakthrough or a deliberate policy of isolation. Either way, any help was better than facing annihilation alone. Set course for the coordinates, he ordered, and transmit our acknowledgement. Tell these humans that the Stellar Coalition is grateful for their assistance, however modest it might be. The journey to the meeting point took them through the neutral zone, a region of space that marked the boundary between explored and unexplored territory. Here, ancient stellar formations created spectacular light shows against the cosmic backdrop, but the beauty was lost on the Coalition fleet as they limped through space on failing engines and depleted energy reserves. When they arrived at the designated coordinates, an empty region of space near a dying red giant star, they found nothing but void. Hours passed with no sign of the promised human fleet, and doubt began to creep into the hearts of even the most optimistic Coalition officers. "Sir," Ensign Mora called out suddenly, her antennae twitching with excitement. "I'm detecting massive spatial distortions. Something big is coming through hyperspace." The space in front of them began to ripple and fold, reality bending as something enormous prepared to emerge from the higher dimensions. Crix had seen many fleets arrive through hyperspace jumps, but this was different. The distortions were more controlled, more precise than anything he had witnessed before. What emerged from the hyperspace rift defied all expectations. The human fleet consisted of 43 vessels, each one a masterpiece of functional design. Unlike the ornate species-specific aesthetics that characterized Coalition ships, these vessels were purely utilitarian, their gray hulls marked only with simple numerical designations and a strange symbol, consisting of curved lines forming what appeared to be a planetary surface with stars above it. The lead ship, only slightly larger than the others, approached the Eternal Vigilance with smooth, deliberate movements. Its hull configuration was unlike anything in the Coalition database, featuring modular sections that could apparently be reconfigured for different missions. As it drew closer, Crix could see weapon emplacements that seemed almost modest compared to the massive gun batteries that Coalition ships typically carried. "Incoming transmission," Mora announced. "They're requesting permission to come aboard for face-to-face discussions." Minutes later, Crix found himself in the main docking bay accompanied by his senior officers, as a small shuttlecraft settled onto the deck with barely a whisper of displaced air. The craft itself was a study in elegant simplicity. Its clean, lines suggesting advanced but understated technology. The airlock hissed open, and the first human stepped onto Coalition soil. Admiral Crix's compound eyes widened in surprise. The creature was smaller than most Coalition species, standing perhaps 2 meters tall, with pale pink skin and strange hair growing from the top of its head. It wore a simple uniform of dark blue fabric with minimal decoration, and its face bore an expression of calm confidence that seemed almost unsuited to their desperate circumstances. "I am Commander Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force," the human said, her voice carrying clearly through the universal translator. Behind her, 2 other humans emerged from the shuttle, both carrying themselves with the same quiet assurance. "Thank you for allowing us to respond to your call for assistance." Crix stepped forward, his ceremonial armor clanking with each movement. I am Admiral Crix of the Stellar Coalition. Commander Chen, I must be honest with you. Our situation is desperate. We face an enemy that has destroyed most of our fleet and threatens the extinction of our civilizations. I appreciate your willingness to help, but I fear your 43 ships, however advanced, may not be sufficient to turn the tide of this war. Commander Chen smiled, an expression that somehow managed to convey both understanding and determination. Admiral, I appreciate your honesty, but before you make any judgments about our capabilities, would you mind sharing with us everything you know about this enemy? Their tactics, their technology, their patterns of behavior? My species has learned that understanding your opponent is the first step toward defeating them. Over the next several hours, in the Coalition's main briefing, Chamber Crix and his officers shared everything they knew about the Void Hunters. They showed battle recordings, tactical analyses, and casualty reports. They explained how the enemy seemed to anticipate every Coalition strategy, how their technology appeared superior in almost every category, and how their leader, Supreme, Overlord Zephyros, had proven himself to be a tactical genius without equal. Throughout the briefing, the humans listened with intense concentration, occasionally asking questions that seemed oddly specific. They wanted to know about communication patterns, supply chains, command structures, and psychological profiles. Their inquiries often focused on details that Coalition military doctrine considered irrelevant, such as the timing of enemy attacks, the specific wording of surrender demands, and the treatment of captured Coalition personnel. Your enemy follows very predictable patterns, Commander Chen observed after reviewing the data. Their tactical doctrine appears to be based on overwhelming superiority in firepower and technology, combined with psychological warfare designed to break enemy morale before the fighting even begins. Captain Thane shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the thorax granite features expressing skepticism. Commander, with respect, we have analyzed these patterns extensively. Superior firepower and technology are not patterns to be countered. They are realities to be endured. That's where you're wrong, replied Lieutenant Marcus Webb, one of Chen's officers. He was younger than his commander, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. In human military history, technological and numerical, superiority have been overcome countless times by forces that understood how to exploit enemy weaknesses and maximize their own advantages. You speak of human military history, Lieutenant Zara interjected, her energy form flickering with curiosity. But your species appears to be unified. Against whom did you develop these military doctrines? Commander Chen's expression became somber. Against ourselves, Lieutenant. Humanity has a long and bloody history of warfare. We fought each other for resources, territory, ideology, and sometimes simply because we couldn't find peaceful solutions to our differences. It took us thousands of years to learn how to channel our aggressive instincts toward constructive purposes. The Coalition officers exchanged glances. Most advanced civilizations had evolved beyond internal conflict before achieving interstellar travel. The idea of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war against its own kind was both fascinating and disturbing. This gives you insight into military strategy? Admiral Crix asked. It gives us something more valuable than insight, Chen replied. It gives us experience in adapting to enemies who can think, plan, and change their tactics in response to our own. Your Void Hunters may be technologically superior, but they appear to rely on the same strategies that worked against previous opponents. That kind of predictability is a weakness we can exploit. As if summoned by their conversation, alarms began sounding throughout the Coalition flagship. Ensign Mora's voice echoed through the comm system. Admiral, to the bridge immediately. Long-range sensors are detecting a massive enemy fleet approaching our position. On the bridge, the tactical display showed a sight that would have broken the spirit of any Coalition officer. Supreme Overlord Zephyros had arrived ahead of schedule, with not 60 ships but over 100. The Soul Reaper dominated the center of the formation like a black hole given physical form. Its weapon signatures alone more powerful than the entire remaining Coalition fleet. 18 hours until contact, Captain Thane reported grimly. Admiral, we should consider evacuation procedures. But Commander Chen was studying the enemy formation with intense interest, her fingers moving over a portable device that appeared to be analyzing the Void Hunter fleet composition. "Admiral, I'd like to propose something that may sound insane, but I believe it represents our best chance for victory." Crix looked at the human commander with a mixture of desperation and hope. "We're listening." "Don't run," Chen said simply. "Don't try to match their firepower. Instead, let's give them exactly the kind of battle they expect, right up until the moment we don't." The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of the Stellar Coalition, but the future of an entire galactic sector. In 18 hours, two very different philosophies of warfare would clash among the stars, and the galaxy would discover what happens when humanity's greatest strength meets an enemy that has never known defeat. The human way of war, the next 18 hours, transformed the Coalition fleet in ways that none of its officers could have anticipated. Commander Sarah Chen had requested complete access to all Coalition vessels, and teams of human engineers swarmed through the ships like determined ants, installing strange devices and making modifications that seemed to defy conventional military logic. Admiral Crix watched from the bridge of the Eternal Vigilance as human technicians worked alongside Zelani energy beings to reconfigure the ship's communication systems. The modifications were subtle but extensive, creating what the humans called a mesh network that would allow instantaneous coordination between all vessels in the fleet. More puzzling were the devices being installed on the outer hulls of every ship, small projectors that the humans claimed would be essential to their battle plan. "Admiral," Lieutenant Zara materialized beside his command chair, her energy form flickering with concern. "The human modifications are unlike anything in our tactical databases. They're not enhancing our weapons or shields. Instead, they seem focused on communication, coordination, and what they call electronic warfare capabilities." Before Crix could respond, Commander Chen approached with a confidence that seemed almost inappropriate given their desperate circumstances. In the past day, she had become the de facto strategic coordinator of the combined fleet, a role that the Coalition officers had gradually accepted as they witnessed the systematic precision of human preparations. "Admiral, I need to brief you on our battle plan," Chen said. "But first I want you to understand something fundamental about human military philosophy. We don't just fight to win battles. We fight to ensure that our enemies never want to fight us again." Captain Thane, who had been skeptical of human methods from the beginning, crossed his massive stone-like arms. "Commander, psychological warfare is a luxury for those who possess superior firepower. Against the Soul Reaper, our priority must be survival." Chen smiled, an expression that Crix was beginning to recognize as dangerous. "Captain, you're thinking about this backwards. We don't need superior firepower if we can make the enemy's superior firepower irrelevant. Let me show you something." She activated a holographic display that showed the approaching Void Hunter fleet in perfect detail. The Soul Reaper dominated the formation, surrounded by concentric rings of destroyer and cruiser-class vessels arranged in what appeared to be an impenetrable defensive pattern. "Your previous battles with this enemy have followed the same basic pattern," Chen continued. "The Void Hunters approach in overwhelming force. You respond by concentrating your most powerful ships in a defensive formation, and they systematically destroy you through superior firepower and coordination. Every engagement has reinforced their belief in their own invincibility." "Because they are invincible," Lieutenant Zara pointed out. "Their technology exceeds ours in every measurable category. That's where human experience becomes valuable," replied Lieutenant Marcus Webb, who had spent the past day analyzing Coalition battle records with obsessive detail. "In human military history, we learned that invincibility is often just predictability in disguise. An enemy who has never truly been challenged develops blind spots." Chen manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific aspects of the Void Hunter formation. "Look at their approach pattern. They advance in perfect formation because they've never needed to do otherwise. Their command ship stays in the center because it's never been directly threatened. Their weapon timing follows mathematical optimization because no enemy has ever forced them to deviate from optimal firing solutions." Admiral Crix studied the display with growing interest. You're suggesting we can use their perfection against them? I'm suggesting we can use their lack of imagination against them, Chen corrected. Supreme Overlord Zephyros is undoubtedly a brilliant commander, but his brilliance has been developed in a context where overwhelming superiority was always assured. He's never had to adapt to an enemy that fights dirty, thinks creatively, or refuses to follow the established rules of engagement. The next several hours were spent in intensive preparation, as human officers worked with their coalition counterparts to implement the most unconventional battle plan in galactic history. The strategy Chen proposed violated every principle of accepted military doctrine, relying on deception, misdirection, and what she called asymmetric response patterns. When the Void Hunter fleet finally appeared on long-range sensors, exactly where and when their predictive models had suggested, the coalition forces were ready, but their readiness bore no resemblance to any defensive posture that Zephyros might have expected. The coalition fleet had spread out across a massive volume of space, individual ships positioned seemingly at random, with no apparent coordination or tactical purpose. Many vessels appeared to be running on minimal power, their weapon systems offline and shields reduced to emergency levels. To any observer, it looked like a fleet in complete disarray, possibly attempting to scatter and flee. Enemy fleet entering engagement range, reported Ensign Mora from her communications station. The Soul Reaper is hailing us on standard military frequencies. Put it through, Admiral Crix ordered. The bridge of the Eternal Vigilance filled with the image of Supreme Overlord Zephyros, and even the battle-hardened coalition officers felt a chill of fear at the sight. The entity appeared to be roughly humanoid in shape, but composed of what looked like living shadow, with points of red light serving as eyes in a face that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds. Admiral Crix of the failing coalition, Zephyros intoned, each word dripping with contempt. Your pathetic fleet appears to be in complete disarray. Have you finally accepted the inevitability of your extinction, or do you still harbor delusions of resistance? Crix looked at Commander Chen, who nodded almost imperceptibly. This was the moment when everything would either vindicate human military theory or result in the complete annihilation of both fleets. Supreme Overlord, Crix replied, his voice carrying none of the fear that any reasonable being should feel when addressing the galaxy's most dangerous predator. The Coalition has indeed reached a decision regarding our future relationship with the Void Hunters. Surrender, then, Zephyros demanded. Submit to absorption, and I will ensure that your deaths are swift rather than prolonged. Actually, Chen interrupted, stepping into view of the communication pickup, we've decided to decline your generous offer. The red points of light that served as Zephyros's eyes focused on the human commander with sudden, intense interest. And what manner of creature are you? I do not recognize your species from the Coalition's previous pathetic attempts at resistance. I'm Commander Sarah Chen, representing humanity and the United Earth Defense Force, she replied calmly. We're new to this sector, but we've heard quite a lot about your reputation. Very impressive work, really. The systematic destruction of 12 star systems, the psychological manipulation of enemy commanders, the precise application of overwhelming force. It's exactly the kind of predictable, by-the-book military doctrine that we expected from someone with your background. The casual dismissal in Chen's tone seemed to catch Zephyros off guard. Throughout his campaigns of conquest, enemy commanders had typically responded to his presence with either defiant bravado or terrified submission. This calm, almost analytical assessment was entirely outside his experience. You dare to analyze me? He snarled, his shadow form writhing with fury. I have destroyed civilizations that existed before your species crawled out of whatever primitive world spawned you. And that's exactly the problem, Chen replied. You've been fighting the same kinds of enemies for so long that you've forgotten how to adapt. You're about to learn why humans study military history. The communication ended abruptly as Zephyros cut the channel, undoubtedly preparing to demonstrate his superiority through the application of overwhelming firepower. But Commander Chen had achieved exactly what she intended. The Void Hunter commander was now emotionally invested in proving his dominance, Rather than simply executing another routine extermination, all ships execute Chaos Protocol, Chen commanded through the mesh network that her engineers had installed. Remember, unpredictability is our greatest weapon. What happened next defied every principle of space combat that the galaxy had ever known. Instead of forming defensive lines or attempting to concentrate firepower, the coalition ships began moving in patterns that appeared completely random. Some vessels accelerated directly toward the enemy fleet, others began circling at impossible angles, and several actually appeared to be retreating in different directions simultaneously. The Void Hunter response was exactly what human analysis had predicted. Trained to fight enemies who behaved according to logical tactical principles, their targeting systems and command coordination began experiencing difficulties when faced with targets that seemed to have no coherent strategy. Weapons that had been programmed to track predictable movement patterns suddenly found themselves firing at empty space as coalition ships moved in ways that made no mathematical sense. But the true genius of the human strategy became apparent when the first phase of seemingly chaotic movement resolved into something far more sophisticated. The randomly positioned coalition ships had actually been forming a three-dimensional web around the Void Hunter fleet, and the strange devices that human engineers had installed on every hull began activating simultaneously. Lieutenant Webb had called them electronic warfare packages, but their effect was more dramatic than anything the coalition had imagined possible. Across the battlefield, false sensor readings began flooding Void Hunter targeting systems. Phantom ships appeared on their scanners, real vessels seemed to vanish or multiply, and weapon locks became unreliable as electronic interference created a fog of war, unlike anything they had previously encountered. Phase 2, Commander Chen announced calmly as chaos erupted around the enemy formation. This was when the coalition fleet revealed the true purpose of their seemingly suicidal approach patterns. Instead of engaging the Soul Reaper directly, they began targeting the supporting vessels with precisely coordinated strikes that exploited gaps in the Void Hunter defensive formation. Ships that had appeared to be fleeing suddenly reversed course and struck from unexpected angles. Vessels that seemed damaged or powerless suddenly unleashed devastating barrages at point-blank range. Supreme Overlord Zephyros found himself fighting an enemy that refused to behave according to any recognizable pattern. His perfectly optimized formation began breaking apart as individual ships moved to engage threats that appeared and disappeared without warning. Command coordination, which had always been his greatest advantage, became a liability, as conflicting sensor data made it impossible to issue coherent orders. Impossible, he snarled from the bridge of the Soul Reaper, watching as his seemingly invincible fleet began taking casualties for the first time in his memory. No species fights like this. No rational command structure would authorize such chaos. But Commander Chen was just getting started. The third phase of the human battle plan involved something that no galactic military had ever attempted: real-time adaptive tactics based on enemy responses. As the Void Hunter fleet struggled to cope with electronic warfare and unpredictable movement patterns, human analysis teams were studying their every reaction, identifying new weaknesses, and developing countermeasures on the fly. They're trying to compensate for sensor jamming by switching to visual targeting, Lieutenant Webb reported from his mobile command station. Adjusting holographic projector frequencies to maintain phantom ship effectiveness. Enemy command ship is attempting to establish direct neural link with subsidiary vessels, added a Zilani technical officer whose energy form was interfacing directly with the human electronic warfare systems. Recommend activation of neural feedback protocols. What followed was a masterpiece of technological improvisation. Human electronic warfare specialists, working in perfect coordination with Zilani energy beings and Craxi tactical officers, began implementing countermeasures that evolved in real time to match enemy adaptations. Each time the Void Hunters developed a response to one tactic, the coalition forces would shift to something completely different. The turning point came when Commander Chen implemented the final phase of her strategy, something she had called psychological cascade failure. Instead of trying to destroy the Soul Reaper through conventional means, the human forces began targeting its command authority through a combination of tactical humiliation and strategic isolation. Admiral Crix, Chen said calmly, as explosions lit up the space around them. Would you care to do the honors? Crix understood immediately. Opening a channel to the Soul Reaper, he addressed its commander with words that would echo through galactic history. Supreme Overlord Zephyros, he said, his voice carrying the confidence of a being who had just witnessed the impossible. Your fleet is defeated, your tactics have been countered, and your reputation for invincibility has been permanently destroyed. The Coalition offers you the same choice you have offered so many others. Surrender now, or be destroyed by forces you cannot understand or counter. The response was a scream of rage that seemed to tear through space itself. The Soul Reaper abandoned all tactical discipline and charged directly toward the Coalition flagship, its massive weapons blazing with the fury of a being who had never before experienced defeat. It was exactly what Commander Chen had been waiting for. As the enormous dreadnought committed itself to a direct assault, human-modified Coalition ships emerged from their concealment throughout the battle zone and struck simultaneously at the Soul Reaper's now exposed flanks and stern. The vessel that had been invincible while protected by its fleet was suddenly vulnerable, isolated, and facing attacks from angles its designers had never anticipated. The end, when it came, was swift and decisive. The Soul Reaper broke apart under the coordinated assault, its destruction sending shockwaves through the remaining Void Hunter fleet that went far beyond mere physical damage. An enemy that had defined itself through invincibility suddenly found itself leaderless, defeated, and facing opponents who had proven themselves capable of tactics beyond their comprehension. The surviving Void Hunter vessels fled in different directions, their unified command structure shattered along with their confidence. Some would be hunted down by Coalition forces over the following months. Others would retreat to unknown regions of space. But none would ever again present the existential threat that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization. In the aftermath of the battle, as Coalition engineers worked to repair damaged vessels and medical teams treated the wounded, Admiral Crix found himself standing in the observation deck of the Eternal Vigilance, staring out at the debris field that had once been the galaxy's most feared fleet. Commander Chen joined him at the viewport, her expression thoughtful as she watched human and Coalition crews working together to salvage useful technology from the wreckage. Your species has changed everything, Crix said quietly. Not just this battle, but our understanding of what warfare can be. We thought we knew how to fight, but we were just following patterns that others had established. Chen nodded. That's the thing about patterns, Admiral. They're useful right up until someone comes along who doesn't know they're supposed to follow them. Humanity spent thousands of years fighting enemies who could adapt, evolve, and surprise us. It taught us that the only reliable strategy is the willingness to abandon strategy when circumstances change. And now, Crix asked, what happens to the galaxy now that the Void Hunter threat has been eliminated? Now we build something better, Chen replied. The Coalition has proven that different species can work together effectively when they combine their unique strengths. Humanity can contribute our experience with adaptive warfare and technological innovation. Together we can create a defensive alliance that doesn't just react to threats, but prevents them from developing in the first place. Over the following months, the integration of human military doctrine with Coalition strategic planning revolutionized galactic defense capabilities. The concept of adaptive tactics, real-time battlefield analysis, and psychological warfare became standard elements of military training throughout known space. More importantly, the victory over the Void Hunters demonstrated that cooperation between diverse species could achieve results impossible for any single civilization. The Stellar Coalition was reformed as the Galactic Defense Alliance, with humanity taking a leading role in strategic planning and tactical innovation. Commander Sarah Chen was promoted to Admiral and appointed as the first Director of Adaptive Warfare, a position created specifically to ensure that the galaxy would never again be caught unprepared by an enemy that relied on predictability and intimidation. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical rather than military. The victory over Supreme Overlord Zephyros proved that there was no such thing as an invincible enemy, only enemies that had not yet been properly understood. This realization spread throughout galactic civilization, inspiring new approaches to exploration, diplomacy, and scientific research. Years later, when historians attempted to analyze the Battle of Omega Station and its aftermath, they would identify it as the moment when galactic civilization truly came of age. It was the day when beings from across the galaxy learned that diversity was not just a strength, but a necessity for survival in a universe full of unexpected challenges. And in the archives of human military history, the battle would be remembered not just as a victory, but as proof of an ancient human saying that had proven its worth among the stars. The best way to predict the future is to create it. The galaxy had learned to fight like humans. More importantly, it had learned to think like humans. And that made all the difference.